I live in Minneapolis.
I live in St. Paul.
Twin Cities.
I won't pick on St. Paul today.
How long I've lived in Minneapolis? A year and a half.
100 years.
All of our lives, actually.
All of our lives.
I was born in Washington, D.C. I grew up in New Jersey.
I'm from Malaysia.
I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area.
I'm still here because we fell in love and got married.
Born and raised north side Minneapolis.
Both from South Dakota.
Originally from Memphis, Tennessee, and I came here in 1980 and been here ever since.
I like it better here.
Speaking as a transplant, before I got here, I never thought about the Twin Cities, ever. It never occurred to me.
You know, anything in the Midwest is, if it's not on the coast, it's not with it.
You live in a cow town. You live in the middle of nowhere.
I think they think it's cold all the time. The winter, I hate it.
Winters here are real cold.
We go to California.
Make a lot of soup.
The key is to get out. The key is definitely to get out.
The winters are cold, clear, lots of outdoor activities.
I like to snowboard and ski and that kind of thing.
Sledding, I take my little brothers out.
After being here so many years, I've learned to really love the winters.
It's not as bad as it seems. You'll live through it.
It's pretty easy to live here.
It's a great place to live.
Yeah.
It's
Great quality of life.
Great quality of life. Walking down by the river and everything like that, I love that. You're in the city, but at the same time, you get like the nature aspect of it.
I think the cities themselves are really built at a reasonable, humane scale for an American city.
There's lots of green space, plenty of places to go walking or get outside.
I'm really into urban agriculture, local foods kind of stuff, and I think that's a movement in general in the country right now, but especially in this city, it seems like something that's growing and has a lot of grassroots energy around it.
#1 bike city in the United States. They overtook Portland last year. We take advantage of urban bike riding all the time.
Coming here and seeing that there's a lot of diversity was something that I found surprising. I feel very part of the community.
I really like the city, and I couldn't really imagine moving. I don't know. I'm just really comfortable here.
I think people never quite associate how present and valuable and like overwhelmingly great the arts are here, all kinds.
Music and art and photography and just like everything.
You're close to the theater, to opera, to the orchestra.
I'm really into music. Maybe it's because I'm a diehard Prince fan.
First Avenue is my favorite place to see. When I was younger, I was intimidated by it. I didn't think I was cool enough. I still might not be cool enough.
Well, we like keeping it a secret, but since it's out there now, if you really like big city in a not so big city, this is a perfect place.
We've traveled a lot in many, many places, but there's nothing like coming back to the Midwest.
Something about Minneapolis, it calls you back.
There's a lot to do and there's a lot to see, and it feels good to be here.
This is probably the place for me for at least a decade, I guess. I don't know what happens in a year. So.
I love Minneapolis. I could live here all my life.
I don't think I will ever leave the Twin Cities. I think I'm here to stay.
It might surprise you to hear that one of the hot destination cities, especially for young so-called millennials, is the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. I traveled there recently as part of our partnership with The Atlantic to explore the findings in a recent article in the magazine and to try to find out whether the so-called Minneapolis miracle is really paying off for everyone. In many ways, millennials ages 18 to 35 may be the biggest victims of the Great Recession. Writer Derek Thompson has lived this reality in New York City, one of the most expensive on earth.
Can I get a cortado and a blueberry? I wanted to figure out why the American dream seemed to be splintering between cities that were upwardly mobile and cities that were affordable.
For answers, Thompson turned to the latest national data on cities with the greatest opportunity to move up into the middle class and beyond versus the cost of living.
The cities that were the best for upward mobility were the worst for affordability, and that the cities that were the most affordable had bad upward mobility.
One exception to the rule:
Minneapolis-St. Paul was clearly at the top. It was the richest city that was exceptional.
The greater Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area is made up of at least 13 counties and approximately 3.5 million people. The latest U.S. Census ranks it as having the 5th highest median household income in the country.
Among workers between 18 and 34, it's top 10 when it comes to median income. It's top 10 when it comes to lowest poverty rate, when it comes to highest share of college graduates.
Good statistics for a city that often goes unnoticed on both coasts.
I'd talk to my professional friends around the world, and they'd ask me, what are you doing in Minneapolis?
Miles Shaver is a business professor at the University of Minnesota's Carlson School of Management.
And I'd say there's 17 Fortune 500 headquarters in town, and they'd go, you can't be right.
The area is home to many world-class brands, including Cargill, General Mills, and Target.
We've had this talented workforce that tends to stay here and move amongst companies rather than pick up and move across the country.
Many believe the success the Twin Cities have seen is more than just an accident of location, commerce, and quality of life.
There's always been kind of a collective sense of community in the state of Minnesota and in the Twin Cities.
St. Paul Mayor Chris Coleman knows the area's political history well. His father, Nick Coleman, was the state Senate Majority Leader from 1973 to 1981.
In the 70s, there was an incredible spirit of what can we do differently to make sure that everyone is benefiting and that the whole state is elevated as a result of our policies.
Politicians on both sides of the aisle passed progressive education, tax sharing, and housing laws.
It was called the Minnesota Miracle at the time. It was very unique and it had tremendous benefits to the quality of life of the city.
Former state legislator and law professor Myron Orfield runs the Institute on Metropolitan Opportunity at the University of Minnesota.
And we decided in 1971 that every community would share 40% of the growth of its business tax base.
Minneapolis-St. Paul was one of a very few metro areas in the entire country to enact a fiscal disparities law.
They take half the growth of business income taxes in the metro area and they spread it across the region. What this does is it allows the less rich communities in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area to share in the commercial wealth of the entire city.
How much does the city of St. Paul right now depend on that formula to stay fiscally strong?
It is absolutely a critical piece of the funding for the city of St. Paul. 2/3 of our revenues go to police officers, firefighters, other public safety services. If we lost that revenue sharing piece of it, it would be very difficult for us to maintain those levels of public safety.
In addition, in the 1970s, the Minnesota legislature was also one of the few in the country to focus on integration in public housing.
For 15 years, we built 70% of our low-income housing in the widest part of suburbia, in the widest neighborhoods.
They did a really good job of making sure that ghettos weren't congealing because they weren't concentrating all of the affordable housing in a couple areas.
Well, there was a shared prosperity in the Twin Cities for every racial group, probably up and through the mid-'80s.
But decades ago, the region was less than 5% minority. Today, it has grown to 20%. In addition to African Americans and Hispanics, the area is now home to the largest Somali and Hmong populations outside of Somalia and Vietnam.
Starting in the late 1980s, we allowed our civil rights laws to lapse, like much of the country did.
After a decade of a fair share housing policy, in 1986, Democrats who controlled the state house and governorship stepped back from it.
Our patterns of segregation are still half the national average. We're still better, but we're not what we once were.
What is it like to live in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area?
Depends on who you are, what your race is, what your economic level is, what your educational level is.
Sandra Samuels is president and CEO of the Northside Achievement Zone, an educational nonprofit focused on ending multi-generational poverty in North Minneapolis.
It's a tale of two cities. It really is. We have the highest racial unemployment gap in the entire country between people of color and white people in this state.
While Minneapolis-St. Paul may be a top pick for millennials, the difference in opportunities between blacks and whites is one of the widest in the country.
We have a 47% four-year high school graduation rate for African American students. And statewide, it's like 86% for white students. Home ownership, 76% for white families and 34% for African American.
So my question is the American dream really attainable here?
In North Minneapolis and in the very poor pockets of segregation that are growing, the American dream is falling further away than it's ever been before.
By 2040, the minority population is expected to grow to at least 40%. And local leaders say the racial disparity in education, opportunity, and income must be addressed if Fortune 500 companies are to continue to come and thrive.
They're not here for our beachfront property. They are here because we have historically had the most educated workforce. And when you look at who our workforce will be by 2040, they are not being educated in an equitable way. And so we won't have the workforce that our region needs.
In a popular eatery not far from City Hall, we asked a group of millennial nursing students their opinion of the Twin City metro area.
Even though it is majority white, there's something that you can find whether you are black, white, different cultures, different sexual orientation, everyone's welcome.
I'm an immigrant. I'm from West Africa. 2 years ago, I was able to afford my own home. Minnesota was able to incorporate my education from Africa here so that I can pursue my dreams.
I love Minneapolis. That's why I can be caringly candid around the places where we have got to come together and change this thing for people.
We are far from perfect. We have some huge challenges in this community. But we have a base upon which to build that I think will allow us to deal with issues of racial disparities, for instance.
In fact, many metro areas in the U.S. are dealing with the same challenges the Twin Cities are, growing racial inequities even as economies